we have a huge population of families that have zero access at home. So, of course, our schools are well outfitted internally. We do have some schools that do a one-to-one Chromebook situation, but even that is only great if you have internet access because a Chromebook has to have internet. Even prior to the events of the flood and everything, we have seen a huge disconnect in how many families have access to internet and technology. Phones, we tend to, they have a phone. But what we also see is we have a lot of families that have like a prepaid phone that maybe doesn't have the data or have the internet access. And so that's, one side of the spectrum that we see. And that obviously is an issue all in of its own because the solution to that requires a lot of money, right? But something that I think long term, I love the idea of there being an opportunity to, eventually someday have some sort of like citywide broadband, internet where they don't have to go to a library or something. It's like I can just connect my device here because we have this availability. But on the other side of that, what we see with families who have access to technology is a couple of interesting things. One, we actually have a couple, and I think I kind of mentioned this before, that are really trying to figure out how do I navigate technology with my family. So, what does this mean for my kids? How does it impact their health and their mental health? How does it impact my parenting? How can it be a tool or a resource? But we also have some, and I sat in a really interesting meeting where a mom who has two kids, her thing was, how do I get away from technology was the other piece. How do I go back to having conversations with my kids and getting them to want to play board games? And, I think in a world where we're so connected to these, that it kind of took me aback for a second that I was like, you know what, you're right. I don't have children of my own, but I do have nieces and nephews, and I know that when we're with them and they're, these teens, it is very much glued to them. And so I'm sure that as a parent is difficult when hey, talk to me and how do you engage in those conversations? So I thought that was kind of an interesting take on the technology piece that I think sometimes we forget is that there are some families that have an overabundance, right? And that's part of what creates that divide. Um, Outside of technology and even connected to it, mental health is a huge thing in all of our families. Even prior to the flood, and I'm sure Helen knows this too. Um, Access to mental health resources across the state, across the nation is hard. Here in Roswell, it is something that we see either culturally it's not acceptable to access that care yet because we're still thinking that there's a little bit of taboo about admitting that we need some sort of support. Or it's a money thing, an insurance thing, an access thing, or it's just that you're 4 to 6 weeks out from any sort of support. And so, we get a lot of parents asking, like, what do I do? Or what have I done? And it's not anything maybe they've done, but how do they proceed in supporting their kids with some of those things and making connections with their students? And so those are just some of the kind of off the top of my head things that I feel connect with kind of your vision and mission for the needs and the assets of the grant program.